listening to This Won't Fix You. I'm your host, Nadine Pittham, and this show is a curation of interesting models, metaphors and images discovered or manifested through my work as an accredited psychotherapist. You can expect to hear nifty ideas, clever language and thought-provoking ways of looking at life. Each episode, you'll get one of two alternating perspectives. First, a conversation which introduces and discusses the theory or idea, and we call this the A side, and then the B side, which, while not therapy, is a deeper exploration of that theory or idea from a more therapeutic standpoint. So, hello everybody, and welcome to This Won't Fix You. We have Johnny Cragg with us today, and Johnny Cragg lives in... do you know what, Johnny? I don't even know where you live. I just know it's the States, and it's on the West Coast.
That's correct. I live in Oakland, California.
That's where the Raiders are from, isn't it?
I think so. I'm not super up on American sports, but it's in the Bay Area. It's what they call East Bay. So it's just east of San Francisco. It's just south of Napa, where they make all the wine. And it's just north of Cupertino, where they make all the computers, or where they do all the technology and software around the computers.
And where you live, they make all the therapists.
Yeah. And graffiti artists.
And you are a DBT therapist, is that right?
Yeah, I do DBT and RO DBT, which is radically open DBT. It's a kind of variant of the standard model, which I can get into a bit in a moment. But it's, in a nutshell, DBT was developed for conditions and presentations of under control, like addiction, emotionality, borderline personality disorder primarily. And it got generalized to other diagnoses. And what they found down the line was that there were a lot of people with presentations of over control, typified by, obsessive compulsive disorders, anorexia nervosa, garden variety anxiety, that the treatment didn't work for. So they kind of reimagined it for people that need to relax a little bit, in other words.
And so you do both?
I do both, yeah. Yeah, they call me the most under-controlled RO therapist on the planet. So I guess the idea is that I model this, all over the place sort of presentation to try and get people to sort of chill out a bit. And
it works? You have success?
Well, you'd have to ask them. But I think it works. I think it's effective. Yeah, I think it's a great model.
And we're talking about emotional inventories, or you say inventories. Does it fit in both, or one or either of the DBT or the RO DBT?
It fits in both, but I think it's more pertinent to standard DBT, namely that folks with presentations of over control tend to take a concept like emotional inventory very, very seriously, and they can be very planful and very exact about it, which is not necessarily what we're trying to kind of cultivate in the sessions or in their lives even.
So who's it for? Do you want to first of all tell me what it is, and then explain who would really benefit from it, from taking emotional inventories?
I think the idea of emotional inventory is primarily to understand that you would use a very different skill set if you are, let's just say we've got a thermometer that goes up to 100, right? And if you're at an 85 for anger, you would use a very different set of skills to say if you're at a 20 for jealousy. Do you understand what I mean? So
I understand so far. Yeah, I thought you were going to say more. Sorry.
Yeah. So
I'm with you so far.
So yeah, if you're very, very emotional in a certain situation or context, you would probably need something more robust by way of a skill set than if you were moderately emotional. We might be looking at a distraction skill, or a change of temperature, or some intense bursts of physical exercise. Whereas if you're, in the lower lying, if you're in the 15s or the 20s or the 25s, you might be looking at a more cognitive skill where your brain is more online. You haven't been hijacked by your emotions.
Got it.
So you're looking to do something a little bit more sophisticated.
Okay, I understand. So what you're trying to get people to do is to rate their responses, rate what's going on inside them.
Yeah, it's a pretty actionable model. It's quite collaborative. So what would happen is we'd come up with what Marsha Linehan would call a life worth living goal. And it's essentially a kind of mission statement for the therapeutic process. Like, what do I want to do? Who do I want to be? What are achievable goals within this therapeutic relationship? Mm-hmm. So once you've got that and you understand collaboratively what that is, you go about recognizing the behaviors that are an affront to those goals. What's getting in the way, in other words?
Got it. What's in the way? Yeah. I use that, exactly that same idea. What's in the way of it then? That's where you want to be. What's in the way?
So, once you've got that, you can say, well, I can have a thought, and the thought can generate an emotion, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're all emotional beings. Emotions are in our bodies to give us information, right? Except when the behavior that it translates into capsizes, a relationship or a job or something like that.
So you're talking about a narrative, a kind of an interpretation then that people have?
It's part of the journey from the translation of an emotional response into a behavior, because you can have a thought. I mean, you can have thousands of thoughts, right? Every day we have thousands of thoughts. It's all about what you pay attention to, So you could have a thought that your partner doesn't love you anymore. You could have a thought that you can't do your job. You could have a thought that you want to kick your grandma down a flight of stairs. It doesn't mean to say you have to act on it. It just means to say that it's a thought, right? So the glue that holds DBT together, this is what Marsha came up with in the 80s and 90s, because she was a cognitive behavioral therapist. And somewhere along the line, she got disillusioned. And she took some time out, essentially, and studied mindfulness. She went and traveled, and she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She would describe herself as the sickest person in the room. And in many ways, the cognitive behavioral model was falling short for her. So she infused her model with mindfulness. So mindfulness informs all the skills. So it's essentially a mashup of, a straight up cognitive behavioral evidence-based practice and Zen Buddhism, if you like. That's
intriguing. What's the Zen Buddhism element of it?
Well, that's she's drawn from Zen Buddhism those basic tenets of mindfulness, like the what and the how of mindfulness. Like, what you do is you observe, you describe without judgment, and you participate fully. And then how you do it is you do what you do effectively. You do it non-judgmentally, and you do it one-mindfully. And that suffuses everything in DBT. So it's the sort of glue that holds it all together, if you like.
Can you give us an example of and I appreciate you can't use actual people case studies, but perhaps you can, I don't know, kind of cobble together a sort of a fictional scenario in your head that isn't necessarily, somebody's experience, and tell us how that would present.
Okay, so I could say you have a couple in a domestic partnership. Let's just say one of the partners came into my consultation room and says, "You'll never guess what. I had this horrible fight with my partner." And I'm like, "Oh, really? What happened? Tell me about what happened." And they'll proceed to tell me about what happens. And I say, "Well, look, do you mind if we do a chain analysis?" Chain and solution analysis is a key tool in DBT. And what we're looking at is the antecedents, the behavior itself, and the consequences. So, and to zoom in on that for a minute, you're looking at what is the behavior that you want to change, right? So let's go back to the couple. They had this big fight, and the person that's in my consultation room threw a pan at their partner and hit their partner, and they had to go to the hospital. And you're like, okay, well that's unfortunate. So let's zoom back to what actually happened, and let's take a little bit of a inventory of what happened immediately before it. And they might say, well, I went out the night before and I had a few drinks with my friends, and I was pretty hungover when I woke up the next morning, and I took the day off work. My partner went into work as normal, and I skipped breakfast because I just had this raging hangover and I just couldn't sleep. My headache was so bad I couldn't sleep. And then they came home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They got angry with me because I hadn't tidied up the front room because we'd been in the room partying the night before. So we got into this fight, and I threw the pan at my partner. And I'll be like, oh no, that's awful. But let's just take a closer look at what happened. So what we know already is that sleep and food are pretty critical to that chain analysis. That person has not slept adequately. That person has a hangover. That person has not eaten breakfast. So by the time the partner comes home, we know that there's a lot of vulnerabilities in the chain. Then you zoom in further and you say, well, what did they say to you? Well, they said this thing about, they made a personal comment, and that was it. I flipped out and I grabbed the pen and I threw it at them. Okay, so we've now identified the prompting event. The prompting event was the comment, right? Mm-hmm. So let's zoom in closer to the actual moment that you picked up the pen and you threw it at your partner. Well, what could you have done differently? What do you know already about DBT? What do you know about your physiology? What do you know about what's happened in the last 12 hours that's contributed to this situation? You know that you're malnourished. You know that you're dehydrated. You know that you haven't slept properly. And you know that you're kind of feeling like you're under attack from your partner. So is there an intervention in that moment that you can take? So one of the things we talk about in DBT is the stop skill. It's a great example of an interface of, what is needed in the moment and using mindfulness. So STOP stands for stop, take a step back, observe the situation, and proceed mindfully, right? And there's a lot of echoes of this with other therapists, and I've heard other people talking about inventory. Tara Brach talks about inventory, she uses the RAIN acronym, which is recognize, acknowledge, investigate, and nurture. So it's a similar concept, which is if you just stop in that moment, you can observe not only what's going on in the room. Okay, so what's going on in the room is you're being attacked. Your partner is verbally attacking you, but there's also an untidy front room. There's also an unmade bed. The other very important thing is to observe what's going on internally. What's happening in this moment right now? Where is your emotion? What is your emotion? How do you know what your emotion is? So let's talk about the emotion of anger. So very similar physiological events take place in your body when you're angry as, say, when you're excited, right? So it's the same with anxiety. Like anxiety and excitement, they show up very similarly physiologically. So it's all about just taking that inventory of saying, well, how do you know you're mad? How do you know you're jealous? How do you know that you're in love? What does love feel like? Describe the color blue. Like it's difficult, right? And it takes a minute. So sometimes with clients, it might take 6 months just to build that muscle of understanding that inventory, right? So I work with men a lot, and this is really important work for men because men are growing up to ignore their emotions, and as such, ignore the physiological things that tell them that they're having that emotion. If you then take that concept and you think of it as a thermometer or an inventory or a scale, you can then get into the fine-tuning of which skills to use in which situation.
It's really empowering the person to take control, isn't it? To notice what's going on inside themselves.
Exactly. So it's saying, look, there's nothing wrong with being apoplectically rageful towards your partner. That's information. That's important information. You should be listening to that, and it does not have to translate into a violent action, because that's going to interfere with your relationship goals. That's going to be a direct affront. That's going to land you in jail, right? So no one wants that, of course.
That's beautifully illustrated. Thank you so much for that. And you're absolutely right. There is all sorts of overlap. And I'm really glad that you put in the timescale, that this can take months and months and months to kind of practice looking inward and trusting what you get. Like you say, without judgment, without shame, that what we get is that is just what we are. It's data. I use the word data. You're saying it's information. Exactly the same process.
And it's very interesting how deficits in mindfulness reflect different mental health diagnoses. So, for example, I have ADHD. So observing is very difficult for me. A person with borderline personality disorder might struggle to describe with integrity. So
what does that mean? Help me understand that.
Well, when I say describe with integrity, I mean describe things just as they are through the senses, right? So for the podcast listeners, we're looking at each other on a screen right now, but Nadine can see that there's a picture behind me. Now, there'd be numerous ways that you could describe that picture. There would be numerous ways you could describe a piece of music. Describe Taylor Swift, right? You might be tempted to use judgmental words in describing a piece of music that you either really like or really don't like. So what we're trying to do is to say, well, it's an artist, a female artist, and I can hear that there's a bass guitar and there's a keyboard, and the tempo is maybe at about 98 beats per minute, and there's a sample that happens in the bridge. That would be describing with integrity. But obviously there's a number of ways you can go about that. You can fall into the rabbit hole, especially if you have a borderline personality diagnosis, of getting very hooked on the judgments, very compelled by skewing the information to support whatever narrative you have. You think about the participate part of mindfulness, right? Participate fully in what you're doing, right? Just get into it. Just get up and dance. Everybody dance right now, right? That's very, very, very difficult for a highly anxious, over-control person, right? So the mindfulness components of DBT tend to indirectly those diagnoses, respectively.
They tend to what? I don't understand what you mean. Sorry. They tend to.
Well, you can have an observe. Say, I talked about the stop skill, right? Stop everything that you're doing. Like observe the situation. That might be a struggle for someone like me, right? That might be a struggle to notice, to just slow everything down and notice what's going on. We have another skill. This is a skill for getting what you want. Let's just say I'm your brother and I don't have a car and I need to get a ride to the airport. There's a way to ask for that, right? It's called the Dear Man. It's a very popular skill in DBT. All the teenagers love it because they all use it to get their phones back from their parents and stuff like that. It's a great skill. And the root of it is in assertiveness training from the 60s, essentially. Funny story, when I was in a band, we had a therapist for the group, and we had various beefs with each other, and she gave us these sheets where we would all talk to each other, and it was essentially, when you did this, I felt, and therefore would you, right? So Dear Man's a more sophisticated version of that. It's essentially saying, describe the situation. And when I say describe, I mean just the facts. And when I say just the facts, I mean just what you can see, hear, touch, and taste. Right. Everything else is a thought or an idea, or a judgment or an interpretation, right? So if you can agree on the facts, you've got the template for agreement. You've got a conduit for an arrangement. right? You know that if you can't agree on the facts, you're not likely to have a successful dear man, right? And for a client with borderline personality disorder, describing the situation with integrity is incredibly challenging, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, let's go back to the example of, okay, I'm your brother, and you've got the car. I've got borderline personality disorder, right? And I've had a series of unsuccessful jobs and relationships, and I don't have a car. And it's like, you're always doing this. You never lend me the car. It's like, I'm sick of this. You never think about me. I've got to get to the airport for this important meeting. And, that's the emotionality piece capsizing and hijacking the describe skill. And that's mindfulness. And as you work through the gears of the skill, you then get an opportunity to express yourself. But it starts with the facts. It starts with describing with integrity exactly what's going on, right? So it might be something like, I have a flight to go to Paris on Saturday. The flight to Paris is for an important meeting with the potential for a job. I don't have a car. I know that you don't work on Saturdays, and I'm wondering if you could give me a ride. Can you give me a ride? So the way you do that is just to sort of delineate just what is factual rather than getting into the narrative. You express yourself with a little bit of the emotionality, just a little bit. You assert what you actually need in a very direct way.
You're working through the acronym, aren't you, at the moment?
Yeah, that's the A.
Okay, that's the
and
A.
then the R is to reinforce. So reinforcement, this is behaviorism 101. This is Skinner and Pavlov and all those crinkly old white guys. They talk about reinforcement, like the schedules of reinforcement. How do I make this attractive to Nadine? How can I sweeten the deal? Maybe I could buy you breakfast. Maybe I could put some gas in your car. Just saying thank you alone serves as some sort of reinforcement. You've got to give to get, right? There's got to be some transactional piece to this conversation.
At the very least, I want an acknowledgement. At the very least, I want an acknowledgement of,
absolutely,
of what this is costing me. Not necessarily financially, but...
And it might be something like, hey, I recognize that you've given me a ride a few times in the past, right? I understand that I've asked you a few times now, and I'm aware of it, and I got you. It might not be anything concrete. It might just be an acknowledgement. That's the reinforce. And then the M is to remain mindful. So let's just say you push back. You say, you know what? I've got football practice on Saturday morning. I don't think I can do it. And besides, I'm kind of getting a bit sick of you asking me for a ride all the time. That's the point at which the conversation could get emotional, right? That's the point at which the asker, could lose control. It could be a case of like, oh, well, that's not cool. Well, F you, like, I'm out of here. So the idea of remaining mindful is to keep your eye on the objective. And it's the one mindful piece of the how skill of mindfulness. Sorry, this is a lot. I know this is a lot of dense stuff.
No, I'm holding on to the Dear Man acronym. I'm working through. I've got
it. Brilliant. Thank you. So
I think the listeners are also pretty, we're on episode 15 by now or something like that. So yeah, people are. I think this is grand. We're good.
Wicked. Sorry if I'm being too dense, but anyway, mindful is just taking inventory, staying focused on the objective, and using the broken record technique. So the broken record technique is essentially, hey, Nadine, I can see this is probably not a good time to ask. It seems like you're a little irritated right now. Maybe you're a little preoccupied. Would you mind if we tabled this conversation for tomorrow? Okay, sure. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Okay, bye. And the broken record is just giving you that opportunity to reopen the conversation at a later date. Appear confident, pretty self-explanatory. That's the A in Dear Man. And negotiate, similar to reinforce, is what do you got? Do you have a budget for breakfast? Do you have a way to give your sister a ride when you get a car? Is there something that you can do to sweeten the deal?
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. That's the deal now. And again,
And so,
mindfulness is at the helm of the skill.
Because it's thinking about the other person as well as yourself, and the things that you're being drawn into, but also about the other person and their perspectives and where they're coming from.
Exactly, and it's being able to describe with integrity what is happening without going to the narratives and the hyperbole.
Right. Because it's that then gets emotionally heated. That's the part where people start disagreeing and shouting at each other because.
Exactly. That's when the productivity of the conversation breaks down, and that's when the thermometer starts going up, and that's when you lose control. Because when, as most of us, I'm sure, know, we call. Let's just talk about anger for a minute. When you get angry, we say, "Oh, the blinkers have gone up," and it's a very good analogy for what happens when you get angry. Is your nervous system gets hijacked. And all you can really focus on is being right in that moment, or the moral outrage that you're experiencing. You can't really solve anything when you're in we call it emotion mind in DBT. I'm in emotion mind. I got to step off. I'm out.
And again, recognizing when that's happening, and there's a negotiation there as well, isn't there? Because if my partner keeps wanting to disappear at key heated moments, then I'm going to be frustrated. And so there's a negotiation then between in the partnership or the relationship, if it's not a partnership, because if somebody's saying I need time out, I want to re-regulate myself, and then I'm going to come and have a conversation. I might not want to do that, and so then there's a negotiation over time again that
Good point.
I need to be involved.
Yeah, and the caveat is if you're the one leaving, you have to give some reassurance that you're going to come back. Say, hey, right. I'm out. Let's come back to this in 30 minutes. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to take a cold shower. I'm going to do some breathing. I'm going to do some yoga. I'm going to do something to get back in my body so that I can actually have a productive conversation.
And here's a trailer from a podcast you might be interested in.
Hello, and thank you for joining the Wilderness of Creativity, a platform for creatives and aspiring entrepreneurs to share their stories of survival. Whether you're a seasoned creative or just starting out on a new journey, consider me your greatest fan. We're going to discuss practical strategies to cultivate creativity and consider how we can prioritise and protect our creative energy and space when there are people to please and deadlines to meet. We're also going to explore how creativity can be used as a tool to navigate the highs and lows of life and help us to show up more authentically within our work, personal projects and relationships. Tune in every month to hear how my guests find focus in a world that never stops buzzing and discover what it really means to take the road less travelled. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram, so come and join in with the conversations. And remember, you can subscribe and listen to episodes for free on your favourite podcast platform. If you like what we do, please share and leave us a review to show your support. And that's it. Welcome to your next adventure.
And back to the show. And I'm now thinking as well about what happens to the past trauma that is arguably, and I mean that literally, arguably, creating a more volatile internal system. What happens to the trauma? Like, because you're working very much with regulation in the present tense. You're trying to sort of regulate the present tense to make the present and arguably the future a little bit better. So there potentially are traumas that make somebody's nervous system more volatile. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. This is not a trauma-informed modality. I definitely refer out for someone that has PTSD or CPTSD, and DBT can be very helpful to manage those, in the moment symptoms. So I would say to someone that has PTSD, the distress tolerance component of DBT is super, super helpful. I think all of it's super helpful. And I would probably, divert them to an EMDR therapist for the appropriate treatment.
So I can totally see how it's hugely effective as that sort of firefighting first line of defense. Like we just got to change your behavior in the immediate term. We've got to give you some control over your ability to regulate. And see how it's imperative that people have these skills.
There is a prolonged exposure DBT model, but I'm not trained in it.
Oh, there's a reason why you're not trained. You don't want to do it.
There's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah. Got it. No, I understand that. Yeah. And the outcome, the thing that you're working towards. Sorry, go on. I interrupted you. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's quite all right. For me, my personal arc of learning is, I think EMDR is something that I'm super interested in and would like to learn more about as a kind of addendum to the work that I already do. Because it's true. I mean, a lot of people come in and they have trauma and they're trying to process that. And there's only so far you can take them with DBT.
Mm-hmm. And so the outcome you're looking for then is, well, you tell me, why am I putting words in your mouth? The outcome that you'd be looking for with people is just not to go there. That's not on your agenda to go back to, I'm pointing back over there to a past trauma. What you're trying to deal with is to make somebody's behavior in the immediate relationship dynamic. You're trying to make that better.
Yes. And I think that, there's a certain degree to which you can interrupt, say, for example, recurring nightmares, there's a thing called the nightmare protocol where it's like write down the dream, come up with a new narrative, make it comedic, make it empowering, make it surreal, make it silly, make it whatever you want to make it, but take control of the narrative. And learn it and stay conversant with that alternate narrative. And it actually works. I was a little skeptical about it, and I tried it with a few clients, and they came back and they were like, oh yeah, it worked, So that's one intervention. It stops short of being a comprehensive PTSD therapy.
No, it's horses for courses, isn't it? People are looking for different things, but what you're doing is you're changing people's relationships in the short, immediate term. It's powerful.
Yeah.
And what about, you did allude earlier to, there are people who have, where you work more subtly with people, where they do have a greater degree of emotional regulation. On that thermometer you're talking about, we're talking about the sort of lower end, where they're not as explosive, they're not as volatile, they're nowhere near throwing pans. And tell me about working with those kind of presenting temperatures on the thermometer scale.
I'm trying to think about an example. You could talk about, say, procrastination. It's a very common hallmark of modern life. Everyone's working from home. Everybody's got ample opportunities to, like, screen addiction, screen use, doom scrolling, that kind of thing. How do you use a concept like opposite action to counter procrastination? And again, it could be part of a more complex ADHD symptomology, but opposite action is essentially, if the emotion or the behavior if the emotion doesn't fit the facts, or the behavior is not in line with your goals, could you go opposite to that? And it's the same thing. I'm feeling jealousy. I'm feeling like this person who's talking to my partner is going to take away my partner, right? So what is the opposite of jealousy? What's the opposite behavior to jealousy? Well, what do you do when you're jealous? When you're jealous, you just want to hold on to someone. When you're jealous, you fear that a third party is going to take away something that you feel belongs to you, in parentheses. And the behavior, it doesn't work. it actually reinforces the displacement of the relationship. So would not the opposite be true in that case? Could you behaviorally take the opposite approach in order to cultivate the relationship? So say, yeah, go and hang out with your friend, right? Okay, it might bite you in the ass, but more likely than not, it's going to enhance the relationship. And the partner's going to be like, oh yeah, my partner's really cool. You know, like they give me lots of freedom to do these things, A, B, and C, and that's why I love them so much. Opposite action to jealousy. Opposite action to love. Let's say you had a breakup. What do? You're following this person on Instagram. Oh my God, they've got a new partner, right? They're smooching with their partner on stories on Instagram. Oh my God, it's the end of my world, right? You know, I'm going to walk past my ex-partner's house on the way to work every morning, even if I have to walk out of my way to go past it. And guess what? I saw someone else's car in their driveway. What is opposite action to love? Opposite action to love is to retreat, right? It's to unfollow them on Instagram. It's to take a different route to work. Opposite action to anger is to back the hell up. You know, just don't approach. When you're angry, you want to approach.
What happens to the emotional fallout of that? Because we can arguably make ourselves behave in a different way by, for instance, walking a different way to work so we're not passing their house and seeing the car in the drive. But what are we doing with the feelings then that remain? Because there must be kind of this byproduct then that remains. Even though I'm behaving more dignified, arguably, I'm still
Great question.
Carrying that emotional byproduct.
Well, that's the mindfulness of current emotion, which is to say,
right, yeah.
Emotions don't kill you.
Mm-hmm.
They never kill you. They might feel unbearable in the moment, but the denial of the emotion, the repression of the emotion, is the very self-same thing that prolongates the emotion. It's all about, are you going to rip the Band-Aid off or not, right? You have to rip the Band-Aid off, and it's so hard. It's the hardest piece in DBT, actually. And it's this idea of, if you're familiar with the term radical acceptance, which is, I've got to radically accept that my partner has left me for another partner, and that person's car is in my partner's driveway right now. Except I can radically accept it. I don't have to look at it every morning on the way to work, right? And it's the extinction burst that happens when you just remove the stimulus, right? Because if you're walking past that person's house every morning, it fires all the neurons that take you back to that pain place. Mm-hmm. If you unfollow them on Instagram, there's no more emotional cues. So you're doing two things. Is you're acknowledging the intensity of that emotional event, which is the breakup, and you're saying to yourself, I can accept this. I don't have to like it. I can accept it, and I can choose not to look at it.
That's what Tara Brach uses in the A of Rain, which you mentioned earlier, isn't it? That acceptance is very much like, yeah, I don't have to like it, but what I'm doing is I'm giving myself time away. I'm giving myself time to heal. Yes. I do not need that kind of, it's basically putting pins in your eyes, isn't it? Yeah. I'm just going to put the pins down.
If only I knew that when I was in college.
Have you been there, Johnny? Have you been there?
Oh, I've been there. Yeah, I've walked past the house. Yeah. Yeah, I've had that hot dog. I've read the book. Yeah, I did. I mean, I was that guy. I mean, I was the guy that was putting pins in my eyes, you know, taking years to recover from breakups that could have taken months. It's just, it's sort of rooted in non-acceptance. I can't accept that this has happened. It's not fair. Why me? How dare they? You know, these are all like statements of non-acceptance, right? When you accept a difficult situation, you get through the gears of recovery much more quickly. And it's like grief, right? So grief is different every time. You know, the loss of a parent from natural causes is very different to the loss of, say, a child. or a brother or a sister in an accident. So that's where radical acceptance becomes particularly challenging. It's like, someone dies age 90 of, it's sad, but it's like, I think acceptance comes pretty quickly. But in other scenarios, it's much, much more difficult to model something. I mean, it's like when you're dealing with those massive, massive grief events, and it's like, oh, have you tried radical acceptance? It's like it's not easy. No. It's a concept that needs to be kind of introduced very, very gently, and because there's a lot of pushback to the idea of radical acceptance, because people come into the consultation room and they're in pain.
Yeah, and if you're talking about those mass grief events or an out of sequence grief event, it's utterly contradicting my narrative of how the world should work, isn't it? It's absolutely gone against the order of things, and so then we're railing against randomness, which is a fact of life, isn't it? But impossible.
Yeah.
Take me to one last thing then about how you know when to stop. How do things conclude in your work? What's the role that you play? The role that the client plays? How do you know that those behaviours have been arrived at, the outcomes?
Well, a lot of it's in the treatment plan, and I'm pretty transparent about my treatment plans, or have grown to be transparent. Maybe not at first, but I try to share it with my clients every 3 to 6 months, and I'll be like, hey, have we met our targets? Do we need new targets? Are there some things that you want to work on that are different from what we discussed? And then there's clients that are pretty reliant on weekly counselling. So, for example, I'm transitioning from one practice to another right now because I moved recently from Washington to California, and for various contractual reasons, I'm sort of sunsetting some of my Washington clients, and it really depends on what's clinically appropriate for the client. And in the case, to answer your question, of the client that's met their goals, is it's a collaborative conversation. And I think with DBT, I try to make it time limited. I try to be pretty clear at the beginning to say, well, look, I think we could probably do what we need to do in a year. Maybe we only need 6 months. If the client is doing a group, like a psychoeducation group, I would ask that they do it for a year, so that they really understand the skills and how they apply to them. So obviously it depends on the client, but I try and get them out the door if I can, as far as possible.
I find it's when people, I can be quieter and quieter and quieter, and people have sort of internalized the things that we've talked about, and they start talking about the difference between who they were and who they are now. And I'm like, okay, you're telling me everything's done here. That's what you're telling me. Is it? Are we, like you said, do we need to readdress? But what my job is finite. My job is to make myself redundant. I want you out there and surviving in your own life.
For sure. That's the sign of you having done a great job. And because it's I mean, what happens when it drags on and it's not effective, and it's expensive for the client.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, real world problem.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be unnecessary expense.
Johnny, I'm about to wrap us up unless you've got anything else you want to say.
No, I think I've talked enough.
Before you do go, tell me where people can find you if we've got any, because I do have some folks stateside who download.
Yeah.
I've seen on my stats. So
where
can people find you?
I'm licensed to work with clients in the states of Washington and California, and you can find me at guidepostdbt.com. That's guidepostdbt.com. Our centre is in Corte Madera in Marin County, just north of the Bay Bridge, not the Bay Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge. But we see clients remotely all over the state, and in my case, Washington too.
Johnny Cragg, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a joy.
Thank you, Nadine. It's wonderful to talk to you, and good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us this episode. The B-side, which takes one aspect of this episode and digs a little deeper into how that might be explored in the therapy room, will drop very soon. In the meantime, if you'd like to have more of our conversations and metaphorical excavations, it would be grand for you and grand for us if you would subscribe to the podcast or share a favourite episode with a friend.